Hello, everybody. I've been infiltrated by the cat. So Jasper is here. I'm hoping he's going. No, he's going to sit with us. He's decided that it's very important that Jasper is here to have a conversation about autistic people and burnout. This is Jasper. This is not going to work. You are completely in front of everything that I need to do and see. Hello, lovely people. Please let us know if you can hear us okay. I muted Jodie and Mel initially because it goes really weird and echoey, but hopefully it's sorted itself out now. I mean, I could be a little bit mean. I do have a jabber ball and he hates the jabber ball, so we could. There we go. There we go. Okay. Sorry, I know this a little bit. He won't disappear. He just wants to sit, which is why I have like a plastic I don't know what you call this, like computer stand, so that he can sit on that and not my keyboard, which is over the top. Very, very helpful. Fantastic. Hello, everybody. So I am Dr. Chloe Farahar of Aucademy. And for those who might like to know, I am a shaved-headed woman in a dress with flamingos on it and giant glasses sitting in my office. And I am joined today by Jodie Smitten and Mel Duncan. Are either of you happy to do a description of yourselves?
Oh, never had to do this before. Okay, I'm a female with brown tied up hair and a nose ring, and I'm sat very hot and sweaty in my new office.
Fantastic.
I'm Mel, and I am a female wearing grey vest top, equally hot and sweaty, sitting in my living room office, tattooed, shaved sides, blonde hair, top.
Fantastic. I know it's weird. I know it's an odd thing to do, isn't it? To suddenly have to describe yourself. But it's something we're trying to be as accessible as possible. Hello, lovely people. So the topic today is, she says, I know exactly what it is. It's young autistic people's mental health, but specifically we are talking about burnout again and practical advice for families. We have had Jodie on before, but we didn't get enough, well, we had a lot of time. We spent a lot of time discussing this topic. It's just such an important topic that there were questions that still needed answers. So I very luckily am being joined today by both Jodie and Mel to try and answer some more questions about burnout. While I say it, you know, we're talking potentially or largely about young autistic people's mental health and burnout. Really, all the things that we're talking about can apply regardless of your age. So, you know, I think it's all transferable information. So we're going to start off with our typical things before we jump into the meaty topic, which is, sorry, Sai is in the comments and supporting in the background. For those of you who aren't aware, between the modmins on Aucademy, there is a feud between whether you're team mayonnaise or team salad cream. So feel free to let us know if you're team mayonnaise or team salad cream. There is no other options. Yes, there are other condiments, but you have to pick a side, basically. But this is what we're actually talking about today. Thank you, Si. So our key questions that we ask everyone, which are, who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests, which are sometimes referred to as special interests? Who would like to go first?
Sorry, Chloe, you're going to have to repeat that. I need to turn the comments off. I just got completely distracted by some mayonnaise. I'm now answering it myself in my head.
Are you okay? We'll start with that. Jodie, are you team mayonnaise or team salad cream?
Well, I was just thinking that it's not a simple answer. I mean, it depends on what you're eating it with, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
I need more information. It's like when you fill out those questionnaires, isn't it? You know, when you fill out those questionnaires, like assessment questionnaires, Like
Do
particularly.
you prefer a library or a party, or?
Depends what sort of party it is. Depends what sort of library it is. Is there a coffee shop in the library? What sort of cake do they serve? Who's at the party?
Okay, Mel, what about you? Would you be team mayonnaise or team salad cream?
Salad cream all the way.
Fantastic. Yes, we're a very small team, but it just means if there's an apocalypse, we have less people to fight for the salad cream, right? Fantastic. Apparently there's I can't pronounce this one, Aioli uprising. What is that word? It's a type of AOILI.
Small Aioli uprising.
It's basically another condiment. I really do recommend not looking at the comment section for a little bit. And it will be we are talking about a very serious topic today, but it is good because to have some lightheartedness given the seriousness of the topic. So the question again is, who are you and what are your dedicated interests?
Do you want to go first, Mel, or do you want me to go first? I can go first.
I just got distracted by two.
Who am I? Did you say you said who am I, didn't you? Okay, who am I? So I'm Jodie Smitten. I'm an autism specialist working with children, mainly children and young people, but obviously their families as well. And I'm also a parent to neurodivergent I've got 3 children in total who are neurodivergent. So I sort of go into whatever I'm going into in terms of my role with several hats on and several perspectives. My special interests. Okay, so autism mainly, and has been for a really, really long time. I've had other random interests, mainly related to things that I'm particularly anxious about at the time. So when I first had kids, I became like a specialist almost in car seats because I was really apprehensive about them being in car accidents. So I became I did unusual amounts of research into car seats, and I always had really interest in childbirth, child development, early years as well, but not so much now. My main interest now are autism, and in particular around masking, education. I think that's it.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mel, yourself?
So I am also late diagnosed autistic, ADHD adult. Suspect PDA the more I learn about it. What was the rest of the question? Oh yeah, special interests, not special interests. My interests have been similar, actually, listening to what you've been saying. So now I am all in on sort of anything autism, ADHD, PDA, anything to do with that. Anything neurodivergent, basically. But I also am obsessed with dogs, nature, bees. But over the years, I tend to research everything to death that I fixate on, that I become interested in.
Fantastic. And I mean, we've actually got next week on the 31st. I forget that this is a Thursday. So we've got another session on Saturday coming, and then on the 31st, we're doing one on dedicated interests and the importance of them for our well-being as well. And yeah, it's just fantastic to hear about people's dedicated interests. And that's what we talk about actually a bit as well, which is that even if you're not interested in that thing, if an autistic person is interested and knowledgeable in that thing, we are interested because it sounds so passionate and interesting to hear about it from somebody else who knows what they're talking about. And briefly for both of you, so obviously you said late discovered, but when did you discover you were autistic? So how did that kind of come about?
So for me, I was only formally identified last year. I don't even know what year we're in. Maybe last year, the year before. I don't know. Very recently, but it sort of came about really when my eldest was identified, or when we sort of realised that she was autistic. Because for sort of years before that, everything that she did was quite sort of quirky. My husband was always like, "Well, yeah, but you do that." so she's got that from you, or you do that. And so it just sort of figured, really, once she was identified, I was like, well, if she's autistic, then I must be too. So yeah, known for probably since I was maybe early 30s, but only recently formally identified. So I self-identified for quite a few years.
And that is why we use the word discovered, because, you know, we're very depathologized platform, so diagnosis is not essential to knowing that you're autistic. And yourself, Mel?
Similar, actually. Diagnosed beginning of 2020, I think. And that came about mainly from, well, I'm not going to go into this. It's a long story, but many years ago, I used to sit in a social club, and I didn't really mix with many people. I was like looking after the kids mainly and just playing games, Connect 4 and stuff with the kids while everyone else was at the bar. And I just remember talking to a friend of mine's daughter who was autistic, and coming out of that place thinking that's the most interesting conversation I've had in such a long time. And that stuck with me for a long time. But it wasn't until maybe 4 years ago that I was working with another young person who I just identified with a lot. And then I started looking more and more into it. And you know what it's like. I researched it to death. I went through the Samantha Kraft list. I looked up, you know, girls with autism, and you know, I found Kieran. Yeah, and then the imposter syndrome kicks in, and you go, nah. But yeah, apparently so.
And that is a whole other talk and training in of itself, which I'm creating, which is the 6 stages of discovery. Imposter syndrome, anger. Imposter syndrome is part of denial, and so on and so on. But yeah, that's a whole other talk in of itself. Fantastic, thank you so much. So the reason I keep saying this, usually I explain I'm quite selfish. The reason I created Aucademy was because I wanted to learn more as well about the things I don't know enough about. So I like to invite people on where I'm like, that's a really important topic. I need to learn about that more, and which includes burnout and how to actually support people with the burnout that they're experiencing, whatever age they are. So a lot of, not a lot, but a small number of people I'm supporting at the moment are families with young people who have been in an extremely protracted period of burnout. So one of them, we're talking like 3 years, where they're not leaving their room and things like that. And the families are fantastic, really low demand, low arousal. They're kind of just trying to allow that young person to just work through that burnout. And so really why I brought Jodie on initially, and why I'm bringing you back both on now, is to sort of develop some of that discussion that Jodie and I had. So what I initially talked about with Jodie, so I'm going to read what I actually had the first time, which is that I'm interested in discussing the possible reasons why we as a society are seeing so many young autistic people via their parents maybe, or families, maybe not the actual young person themselves, where the autistic young person is unable to leave their room, maybe their devices, and I've been trying to work out the pattern. So I'm like, is it, and I said this to Jodie last time, is it enough to say they're just in burnout, in quotation marks? Like, do we need to be thinking there's lots more going on here? Because I feel like it is probably enough to say it's burnout. The burnout is probably, though, due to a number of things like trauma, school trauma, invalidation trauma, maybe. Some of these young people have described they have no agency outside in the world, right? Society is really... I think what's both good and bad about social media and things like that and the internet is that obviously we have all this fantastic information. If we're a young person who's autistic or an older person who's autistic, we can connect with other autistic people and not be isolated. But the issue with that is that our young people are very, very aware of the state of society right now. Does that make sense? So like, just listening to these young people, they're not concerned about the things I was concerned about at that age. At like 13, 14, 15, I'm talking to these young people this age. I had my own personal issues and traumas, and I felt suicidal. I was masking, all that kind of stuff. But I wasn't worried about the things that they're talking about, like that they can't imagine that they'll ever get a decent job. And although those things didn't come into my head at that age. And it's almost like they're very aware, I think, these young people. So I think some of that plays into it. Is it enough to say it's extreme burnout? And what if I put here? Some of them do want to be able to do more than stay in their rooms and be on their devices, but that's just where they're at, and they haven't got the energy. It's not a motivational issue, it's that energy. They're just so burnt out. They haven't really got these sort of replenishing bubbles at this point in time. So since that's initially what I brought up to Jodie, I have had an epiphany since talking to Jodie and a number of other people, because we're problem solvers. I keep talking to anybody about this problem because I'm like, I need to see the patterns, what is going on for these young people. So since speaking to Jodie, I had an epiphany. So I had an epiphany about burnout as a reasonable response following things like I said, trauma, masking, etc. And what I'm always talking about, which is how every individual person, regardless of their neurology, responds differently to the same experiences. So one person getting bullied will respond with burnout. Another person getting bullied will respond by potentially feeling suicidal. So we don't get to dictate how somebody will respond to those environments. And so what I worked out and thought about is that these families are really concerned that their young people aren't leaving their rooms, that they're not getting motivated to connect to people, or what are they going to do about education, what are they going to do about a job. And I think the difference between me and their young people is when I was their age and going through a lot of difficult time and situation, there is a point to this, and going through like a lot of difficult things going on, I wasn't safe at home to have a burnout. So the way I responded, I was getting drunk at 15 in fields, I was getting into clubs at 15, I was fighting with these noodle arms in clubs on purpose because I was upset, I was angry, I was fed up with the world, I was fed up with the situation. And all of that went on until I was in my 20s. Until I made a decision in my 20s and looked back and went, I've had enough now. None of that's helping. Me being angry at the world, fighting and I mean, I say drinking, I was a binge drinker, so I don't actually like alcohol very much at all. So it wasn't in that sort of, I didn't have an addiction, for instance. And I don't see that there's actually that big a difference between how I responded and these young people, other than they are safe to have that burnout at home. And when I brought this up to a family, I was like, it could be worse. They could have responded how I responded, drinking and fighting in clubs and stuff. Does that make sense? I had this epiphany and I wanted to share it.
I think it's interesting. Like if you consider, burnout is trauma, and our trauma responses can be outward in presentation, and then can be inward in presentation. So if you consider burnout of a child sat in their room, it's almost a prolonged shutdown rather than a prolonged meltdown. And I think going back quite a bit to something you said at the beginning is actually their bedrooms feel very, very safe to them. They may well be connecting with the outside world from their bedrooms. Just because you aren't seeing somebody in the flesh, it doesn't mean that they aren't your friend or that you're not socializing in a healthy way. And you know, and actually, you know, I think you said before we came on air that, you know, like, and I'm very similar, that actually we're quite happy at home. We're quite happy at home. We don't feel the need to go out. Some neurodivergent people do, and they want to be out and about a lot, and some of us don't. So actually, if you consider the trauma that these young people have faced in the world, the lack of agency, that actually, if they go back out into the world, they're still going to feel, because they're always, you know, they're still going to be viewed as a child or a young person. They're still going to be expected to be and present in a certain way, or you know, so they're either going to have to mask, or they're going to have to risk being bullied, abused, ridiculed, looked at, viewed negatively in some way. And it's really difficult. It's really difficult that their bedrooms feel really, really safe. You know, even the rest of the house, even though even though that family might be really, really safe, there'll still be elements of the rest of the house that they don't have agency over. You know, siblings that are bouncing around, or smells, or so their bedrooms are the only place where they do have full autonomy. And I think that's really difficult, I suppose, to accept, but also really difficult in that, you know, how and when is the right time to try and come out of that. And I think, you know, when you consider some young people have been in their rooms, you know, you said for 2 or 3 years. We've spent 2 years, you know, the last 2 years surrounded by COVID, where they've constantly heard on the news that it's not actually safe to leave the house. You know, somebody's telling us we have to stay home right now. So there's a lot of that as well. You know, we're still hearing it all of the time. You know, these young people have got access to the internet. You know, that they're hearing, they're feeling, they're seeing that COVID's still there. So it's a really unusual time to actually be supporting these autistic young people, when actually some of their anxieties of the outside world are actually really, really rational,
really valid, really valid.
Really valid. And I had a lot of parents come to me during one of the lockdowns, you know, really desperate to try and get their child out the house for their one hour a day of exercise, and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, hang on a minute, like, they've been told it's not safe to be in school. They've been told it's not safe to go to shops. So, you know, I don't think this is the time to be wrestling kids out of the house. So I do think we've had that compounding anxiety, and you know, I work with lots of young people who do have quite significant health anxiety. You know, sometimes it's deeper than just getting poorly. Sometimes it's the idea of having to end up in hospital, and the smells of the hospital, and the people prodding you, and you know, so there's so much around that.
My concerns and my discomfort at leaving the house aren't necessarily related to the virus itself. I have realised how hypervigilant I was constantly before, and how my anxiety has reduced now that I only leave the house once a week. You know, when I got my first vaccine and I had to sit outside, I could not be inside the little hospital that I was at. It was too noisy. It was not autistic friendly. I said, can I please sit outside? And I sat outside, and they came out to check that, you know, I hadn't had an allergic reaction. And they were like, are you okay? How are you feeling? Blah, blah. I said, it's really hard to know if I feel my normal level of weird, or if I'm feeling any sense of weird in relation to just having a vaccine that I've never had before, you know, because it was like, my body was just like, no, we do not like this out here. It's not comfortable. I want to ask both of you, and Mel, unless you wanted to jump in and you had a thought that's been burning.
No, I was just going to add with the fear factor stuff. I work with a young person who is slowly coming out of burnout, but as soon as certain feelings and emotions start happening for her, she's terrified of them, because she's terrified of going back to that god-awful place that she came from. So partly there could be that can link into it as well.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm safe here. Like, I often think about these kids that I work with and how lucky I am in the fact that I live on my own with my dog and a stray cat that wanders in every now and again. Do you know what I mean? I can create my own environment. I'm much like you two. I leave when I have to. I can start managing stuff because I'm figuring out what works for me now. Kids don't tend to have that sort of autonomy, do they? They don't have that freedom, plus all the fear factor, plus everything else that's
and the external pressure, isn't it? Oh, sorry, just almost collapsed my desk. So if you are, you know, as adults, like you said, we have that autonomy. There's no pressure around us to go out. We've all developed roles, careers that allow us to have a level of autonomy and that work for us. But even if you are a child that has got that really supportive family that's saying, yeah, you know, stay put, stay comfortable, that there is this constant message of, well, if you stay in your room, how are you ever going to get a job?
Yeah.
They would have heard this throughout their whole career through education. Well, if you don't go to school, how are you going to get a job? If you don't leave the house, how are you going to get a job? If you don't, if you know, how are you ever going to be independent? Well, actually, you know, like us three just sat here are actually proof that you don't have to be out and about to get a job. And there are so many other pathways in terms of education that mean that you can, you know, go into an area of work that you want to. But I think the general message is, you've got to go to school. You've got to go to school. School is the best place to be. And again, like going back to the messages that we received during COVID, it was like, the first priority is to get kids back into school. Kids need to be in school. Kids need to be in school. You know, again, like children and young people were hearing this all of the time. And actually, for lots of young, well, I'd say 100% of the young people I work with, school is not the best place to be. School is far from the best place to be. But when you are a child who for you, school does not work and does not meet your needs, and you can no longer compensate for this neurotypical rigid system, how do you but you've been told all your life, you know, you have to go to school to get a good job, you've got to get good grades in your exams. It's no wonder these kids feel like that they have not succeeded and that they have failed in some way. And sometimes some of the sort of repair work and the recovery work that I end up doing with young people is actually, okay, there's loads of different pathways. There's loads of different pathways to success, and success is your happiness and that you are able to choose your own pathway. You know, and you can do a whole different type. You don't have to do GCSEs. You know, there's other things you can do. There's other pathways, and actually none of this is ever told to kids.
No, and this is like, there's just that one route, and obviously without ever divulging any confidential information, you know, this fantastic, really bright young person, you know, fantastic way of explaining really quite detailed topics of like science and things like this, and he's like 13, and I said, oh, have you ever considered, you know, be an educator or maybe a lecturer or something like that? You're really good at explaining some things. And that was kind of when this whole idea of, well, no, I don't think about that stuff because I have no control or agency over whether I would get that job. Like, and it was just this amazing comment from this young person, realizing that, I say realizing, I hope at some point we can get to a point where he can realize that there are other pathways, like you said, but just thinking there's no way I could do that. The world would not let me do that.
Yeah.
You know, is this what we're telling our fantastic young autistic people? And I have considered this as well, that there's always pluses and minuses, pros and cons to knowing you're autistic younger, and obviously dependent on the narrative that you're also embedded in. Yeah. I didn't know I was autistic, right? I was just this really miserable, depressed, suicidal, etc., person. So I didn't have that added pressure of also knowing. I knew I was different, but I could mask to some extent. I wasn't known as different, and I wasn't being told by society, fundamentally, you can't achieve things because you're autistic. And I do worry that this is what these young people are being fed by our society, that they're not capable. And I think as an autistic thing, this is what we do. So I do apologize for people who aren't used to hearing, you know, we use our own lives as examples to show we understand. And I sometimes worry people think, oh, you're just talking about yourself again, but I don't know how else to do it. But, you know, having those different pathways, and I was told at 16 not to bother with further education. I wasn't capable. I went to a terrible school. You know, I dropped out. I tried sixth form. I dropped out. I became very suicidal. I got bullied for being suicidal, you know, because young people are sometimes really horrible. And I went into a terrible job, customer facing, really not a good idea when you're autistic, and, you know, I didn't know it. You know, I went back to education when I wanted to, in my 20s, after I'd gone through my binge drinking stage, my fighting in club stage, and my working out and working past the traumas that I'd experienced, and got to a point where I was like, I've dealt with that now psychologically. I want more from my life, right? And so people, we can have our own pathways. I've gone off a completely different tangent in my head. I apologise. I wanted to ask a question as well, both of you, which is, do you hear the same sort of comment as well from families who are concerned that their young people aren't exercising? They've been in burnout for a year, and I'm just so worried because they're not exercising.
Probably it's not probably the biggest concern that comes my way from parents. I think, you know, working with children who have been in burnout for long periods of time, there's an element where then they are ready to, you know, maybe take a small trip to somewhere familiar, or somewhere that they're, you know, and there's lots of planning that goes into that. Is there then becomes where they've lost a lot of muscle tone, and so walking any distance becomes quite tricky. So it is a case of having to build a bit of stamina up again, and a bit of you know building the body back up again, particularly if part of burnout there's been restrictions in eating, where a child's not felt able to eat. So calorie intake hasn't been particularly high. So sometimes there's a period of frustration, I suppose, when a young person feels ready to do something, but their body doesn't allow them. And I think, you know, that's really hard. But I mean, certainly when I'm supporting young people in burnout, we talk a lot about using sensory tools to give that feel-good factor. But that might be not like going for a walk or something like that. That might be getting the yoga ball out and having a bounce, or being rolled on, or getting on a trampoline. It might be a massage, or it might be, you know, I've got to carry around a massive bag of fiddle toys. So some of those sensory experiences that some people really benefit from are low level exercise.
I was going to say, has anyone seen this?
I've just ordered one.
they're in the works at the moment. That's where I saw it. I'd never seen one before. But
I've gone out of stock.
Oh, I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's quite it's quite good for the muscles in your hand.
Yeah.
Right. For instance, because I generally speaking just have poor muscle tone anyway. But it was just something that interested me. I don't know, Mel, what do you think about? Do you get asked that question or concern?
No, weirdly not, because I know that for mainstream schools, it's part of their tick box, isn't it? You know, exercise and stuff. But what I have done, like with the brick building that I can use for face-to-face work, and I do very few face-to-face, unfortunately. I've put in things like a lot of fiddle toys. I've got a big gym ball. I've got a speed ball, stuff like that. And, you know, this whole thing about exercise, if I put enough stuff on myself about exercise, like, oh, well, I must, you know, oh my God, I need to get fit, or and then you don't do it. And other people might be able to get into a routine of doing it, but a lot of us can't. And it's boring.
I guess to some extent, I just worry about making that the concern that some people may be concerned about that when really what we're talking about is somebody's mental well-being.
Yes.
And yes, it's that vicious circle. We know that exercise can make us feel better, but it's quite hard.
Yeah. And it's also in its own time. So if you start off by building a relationship with the young person, you know, building a rapport, building trust, you're not going to get anywhere without that. And if you find out things about, you know, their interests and let them lead, then sometimes you might find that once upon a time, you know, they loved, I don't know, say my interest, bees, right? And then maybe over time, you might be able to go for a wander down to it's exercise, it's still getting out and getting fresh air. But that, forest school, I'm a massive advocate for forest school. You know, that it's not yet exercise like go and walk 10 miles in however long. But it's
and not making it about exercise,
it's not making it that's exactly, yes, thank you. It's not making it about exercise, it's making it there's a lot of other stuff that goes with it, which is more about mental health. And
I'm definitely one of those people. I mean, I would say I haven't exercised. I barely walk. I literally just walk around my flat. So I haven't exercised in over 2 years. At this point in time, I'm not that concerned. I know my pattern. I know that at some point I will be more active again, because I've recognised my pattern, because I've got to an age where there's enough years I can recognise the pattern. And I guess the concern for some families is that it's almost that they haven't given their young person hasn't got enough years behind them to recognise their pattern of when they're active, when they're not active, when they're active, when they're not active. And mine is big periods, a couple of years, then a bit of activity for maybe a year, then a big period of nothing again. So, and I'm very much one of those people that struggles to do exercise for exercise sake. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this idea of it, and it's boring, like you said. If you can make it a nice, you know, definitely would have been like 2 or 3 years ago. Me and my partner, he's much more active than I am. He thinks it's a little poodle to do like 30 miles on his bike, like push bike. Jodie, I'm glad you look equally as disgusted as me.
Sorry.
No, it's disgusting.
I shouldn't have pulled that face. It was an automatic reaction.
No, it's absolutely disgusting. But we're lucky, you know, we live right near the coast. So 2.5 years, 3 years ago, we would, over the summer, do little poodles, because it's a poodle, because I have to, because I'm not anywhere near as fit as him, just from here to Whitstable to have breakfast and then come back. So the exercise was just a means of getting to the breakfast.
That's what I was going to say. If there's breakfast at the end of it, I'd be tempted.
Yeah. So having it as it's like I say, it's not a demand, it's not a chore, it's not this boring thing. I mean, I do still want to try my roller skates, because actually that's fun. But that's definitely something that is or could be cardio and all that kind of business, but you don't have to think of it as exercise, which is
Yeah.
A lot of my kids that I work with skateboard as well, so stuff like that. There's a lot of different stuff that they really get into. It's just finding something a bit more interesting than going to the gym.
I want to come back to this idea then, like I said, my epiphany about burnout, and that actually they could be responding in any other number of ways that actually they wouldn't be very happy about at all. They could have challenging behavior in quotation marks and all this kind of business. I don't see those young people. I do wonder, where are the young people who were like I was and went out binge? They must exist.
They're in inappropriate services without an identification. they're in youth offending teams and early interventions teams, and they're very often unidentified. I mean, I don't know whether you'd agree with that, Mel, whether that's just an off-the-cuff comment, but I used to work in the youth offending team, and now, when I was very much younger, and when I look back now at the young people that I worked with, I'm like, God, thinking about it now, that young person definitely was very highly likely ADHD, autistic, neurodivergent in some way, and probably was in burnout.
These are the ones that I fear for the most. We've only had a couple come through Gecko. When you meet young people that remind you way too much of you. Well, that was my past. My past was sort of very similar to you, Chloe. You have to go in, the drink, the clubbing, the fight, the custody, the criminal justice system, all that sort of stuff, until finally you turn it around. And then I worked in Vinnie Green, which was a secure unit for kids, and with the youth offending team as well. And they're all there. The statistics for neurodivergent people are massively high within the criminal justice system.
We did last week, David Gray Hammond and I mean really him, because he's the knowledgeable one, but he was talking on autistic people and crime, either as victims or perpetrators. And I looked at a statistic and it was 80%. There's 80% ADHD in prisons.
Wow, that's higher than I realised.
So I'm sure that's right, unless it was ADHD within the criminal justice system.
I can quite believe it. I can quite believe it.
It might have been more broadly within the criminal justice system, not just within prison, as it were. Do you see what I mean? So I can't remember exactly, but it was definitely like 80%. And there's like two things there. That's neurodivergent people with unmet needs, not been recognised, not been supported, not given the tools and the skills to actually know how to regulate, how to actually and not being supported correctly in education, etc., etc. And then there's the other stuff which is what we're talking about, which is neurodivergent people, and then their poor mental well-being may potentially lead them into those sort of, like I say, situations which are not ideal.
Isn't it? When these young people are significantly traumatized due to unmet needs, and even if they have been identified, they haven't had the understanding from the provision that, whatever setting they've been in, but also they're very unlikely to have had support around understanding their neurodivergence and what that means to them. So this comes back to sort of part of what we talked about before we came on air, that self-understanding that leads to self-acceptance, which means that leads to the self-advocacy. What use is an identification to a child if they're just told they've got ADHD and that's it, see you later? It
doesn't mean anything, no. And this, I mean, you kind of phrase it slightly differently, but just because we're all used to different terminologies, but it's the same thing. And it's what I was explaining, which is that if you don't understand your needs, your sensory needs, your social needs, your emotional needs, etc., and particularly if they're gaslit, invalidated, and so on, then you really don't, you get very confused, because it's like, well, I think I feel like this, but I'm being told I don't, you know. So if you don't understand your needs, you can't build the skills to actually support those needs. You're going to mask, you're going to burn out, and so on. And then you can't put in your boundaries, you can't have that autonomy, and then you can't self-advocate, because if you don't know any of that stuff, how are you supposed to self-advocate? You don't know what to say or what to ask for. And when I say, that might be in a non-traditional way as well.
And I think as you know, as neurodivergent adults, a lot of our, actually probably almost, well, all of our self-understanding actually comes from each other.
Yeah.
And you know, I know myself and Mel often have long conversations where we have these epiphanies and go, oh God, that I can relate to that, I get that. You know, and this is the joy of working again with neurodivergent young people, is actually the relationship is incredible, because it's mutually beneficial. I don't know if that's the right wording, but we're always learning from them in the same way that they're learning from us, and that's so important, that access to your tribe. I think we talked about this before, is so important, because you need that relatedness to go, oh gosh, I do that, or that's me, or God, I think that would really help me, you know. And that's where our self-understanding and self-acceptance comes from.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well, because I think I might have said to you before, Jodie, when I'm working with the young people, they never drain me. I am never drained from working with the young people I work with. Neurotypical people exhaust me, absolutely exhaust me. You know, all the bureaucracy and the red tape. That's why I'm self-employed. That's why we set up the business, charity, soon to be. But yeah, I mean, and I hope that can work both ways, even for a computer screen. It's incredible, really.
Yeah.
But having that, the other thing as well is, sometimes I know as adults, it's really hard for us to let go of that whole overprotective-y type of thing. For instance, I'll give an example. I've got a young lad. This is a pattern I'm seeing in quite a lot of my young people, most of whom are with us at the minute through burnout, pretty much. Anyway, he is basically about to go back to mainstream.
Sending him back into battle.
Yeah, and the adults around him have legitimate fears, but we can't take that away from him. That's his decision. He wants to do that. He wants to try again. And we can do as much as to support that, you know, and also start exploring, you know, his neurodivergence, his support, and the ways he supports himself, how he will recognize similar sort of stuff going on for him again, so that hopefully, you know, he does. But we also need to think about, you know, if things go right, that's great. If things don't go right, how that impacts on him and how he, you know, his sense of self. You know, it's a lot of stuff, but a lot of these kids, they keep saying, I just want to be normal. And that's the saddest thing.
Do you know what though, Mel? Like, you know, and I see that pattern, that you know, internalized pressure on self, that I think, you know, is a much wider issue. But also there's an element of me that's sat here going, well, why, I was going to swear then, why am I allowed to swear? Why should he not be able to access what he wants to access, and why is it not accessible for him? That makes me really cross. Like, he has every right to access the education he wants to access, and it's not his responsibility to make that work.
Yeah.
And I've had this with my own child, where I sat in front of a Senko and said, I don't want her to be here either, to be quite frank, but this is her choice. This is where she wants to be, and she has every right to be here. And it is our jobs to make sure that she is safe and that is accessible. Every setting has a responsibility to that child.
I think the difference in what both of you just are describing, so Mel, when I said sending him back into battle, but then you clarified it's his decision. What's actually the key thing there, which is basically what we're now talking about and touching on, is they're actually understanding or starting to understand their neurodivergent selves. Without that, so again, I have always tried to work out, I used to describe myself as an optimistic, depressed person in my 20s. Now I know it was burnout. It wasn't I was depressed at all, right? And I recognize the pattern. So now I have that knowledge. I am empowered by that knowledge. And I use Calendly so that I don't have to keep dealing with the admin of trying to work out when to do meetings with people. I've made the decision I don't do meetings before 11 a.m. On rare occasions, I will make exceptions, but not before 11 a.m. because I can't function very well at that point. I have learnt my needs. So that's the different thing. At this point, yes, we want this society to change. We want our schools to change, employment, NHS, everything that we access has to change. And that is what we will battle for. But at the same time, we still need to go into that battle. So empowering your young people like you're doing to help them recognise that and self-advocate their boundaries so that, because basically that's what you've talked about as well, that we see these different ways for young people and adults, who are dealing with difficult situations or prolonged difficult situations and trauma and so on. Some of them will go through burnout. We feel sad for those ones and we try to support them. Some of them end up in the criminal justice system. They're there for the same reason that probably those young people who are in burnout are there. But we have, I don't mean us, society has a very different view of those individuals, but they're the same thing. They're unhappy. They aren't understanding of their needs, their boundaries, and being able to have that autonomy and self-advocate. That is why they are where they end up. It's not any different to me binge drinking in the field, to the one burning out, to the one ended up in the criminal justice system. But they're just approached very differently, and they should all be approached with, you've been through crap.
I think this seems to be a common thing in society, doesn't it? Where young people aren't trusted for a start. They're just not trusted. So it's like, you've got a young person over there saying, I want to leave the classroom, or, do you mind if I just go to, or using some sort of code word just to get out of that room. If they talk about anxiety, now I know this because I've had conversations with a young person about this, then they get the sort of responses like, well, we all get a little bit of anxiety now and it's like, this kid's...
I need to give you an example that made me absolutely furious. Fantastic young neurodivergent student. So this is in university, and relatively speaking, my university is actually quite good, but it's going to be hit and miss dependent on the person, right, who's supporting people. So I had a number of students, had 80 students across 5 seminars, and a number of them neurodivergent, obviously. And this one neurodivergent student came to me. They They wanted my advice and support because they had known since the beginning of term that they were meant to do a presentation with a group in front of their class for a completely different module, not my module, nothing to do with me, but they had asked since September until after Christmas for their reasonable adjustment to be put in place, which is that they can't do that. They can do a one-to-one presentation with the lecturer. Nobody was getting back to them. Nobody, and they'd been trying. It wasn't down to them. It was on their reasonable adjustments document that was the case. It should have been picked up straight away. And if they'd been my student in that particular module, there's no way that they would have even had to have weeks of anxiety. Went to one of our in-school student support officers, who I believe doesn't have the job anymore for whatever reason, and explained they experience extreme anxiety. They've got their inclusive learning plan, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, everyone gets anxious. Everyone gets a bit nervous when they have to present in front of a group. I went, excuse me, we're not talking about nervousness that goes away once you started doing it for a little while. We're talking about this young student who has for weeks been worrying about this and anxious about this. There's a big difference between anxiety and nervousness.
It's that, yeah. It's that constant invalidation. Oh, they're just making it up. Or they're just,
manipulating.
Yeah. Oh God, yes, manipulating. oh, you just need a bit more resilience.
But that's the worry, isn't it? The young person that you mentioned, Mel, that's going back into this setting. As practitioners, we work a lot on that self-advocacy and developing that voice, and that supporting them to develop those communication systems. But it only takes one person in that setting to not validate, to invalidate, to the whole gaslighting thing, and this is the thing, and this is why the adults around them have got genuine concerns, because this happens time and time again.
Yeah, and also
we aren't trusted or listened to.
No. So, but also we tend to, we don't, obviously. Like this same girl that I'm talking about now, I can sense now we've got a good enough relation where, we'll have a conversation and I can tell when she's potentially burning out, or just needs a day out, or just needs some sort of break. So we'll explore that and talk about that. But schools wait until these kids are virtually on the edge and in absolute meltdown and absolutely rock bottom, so that they can actually see, it has to be seen. Let's not, put in anything that might prevent it happening. We'll just wait until it happens and then we'll sort it out. Well, then we won't sort it out.
And I think what's key there, not only are they a young person, and you can't trust young people, they're autistic young people. And I have learnt this being discovered later, that I was perceived as, competent, intelligent, etc., prior to, but standoffish and cold and unapproachable and all those things that I've been called over the years. Prior to my diagnosis, I am not now trusted, now that people know I'm autistic, by non-autistic people in, meetings and things like that.
Yeah,
we aren't trusted. So not only are they young people that can't be trusted, they're autistic young people.
Yeah,
who can't be trusted.
All the attitude is, they're autistic. So our approach towards them is that we have to make them more resilient, and we have to make them more neurotypical, which is, even more damaging. So, and we know this from all of the horrific training that is out there, that is quite often free to access and bloody government funded, that it is all based on making children, making young people fit a neurotypical agenda, and comply and fit in a box. And so they're not trusted, they're not deemed competent, plus they're also got the pressure that no, you sort of have to do this because you have to fit in with everybody else. I'm actually doing you a favour. I'm preparing you for the real world.
And a beautiful quote of Nick Walker's is, you can't unqueer neuroqueer. All you end up doing is making them even more neuroqueer, because not only have you now got an autistic person, you've also got an autistic person with psychosis, potentially. You could have driven them to psychosis. You've got an autistic person with extreme depression. You know, you really, I love it as a phrase, you can't unqueer neuroqueer brains. So that attempt to try and change neurology to a neurotypical neurology is absolutely impossible and preposterous as a
dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, and this is why these kids are in burnout or in the criminal justice system, being blamed for their presentation.
I feel like we need some hope and some practical, because I feel like we've gone on a very much like this is. I apologise, people. It's got a bit sort of dire.
It's keeping it real.
Well, a thought that I had when you made a comment a little while back, which was that really what you were talking about was that we don't understand ourselves as autistic people via the culture of autism, in quotation marks, the person with autism narrative. We don't learn about ourselves and how to make our days and lives easier. And the only reason I know about burnout, the only reason I started to learn about the importance of sensory and stimming in a positive way and a helpful way, the only reason I know that many autistic people don't think in pictures, and actually that impacts them in terms of whether they recognize emotions and alexithymia and stuff. I didn't learn any of that from a neurotypical led training or from research. I mean, the first burnout paper we had was last year by an autistic person, you know, or a string of autistic people. You know, the reason or the way that we learn, which is what Jodie, you mentioned, you know, the way that we learn to understand ourselves, get the skills, the knowledge, is to connect to the autistic community. So that's my line, which if you're a regular on Aucademy, you know, is the importance of autistic identity, culture, community, and space. And that is always going to be my argument in terms of making our lives better and in terms of making our mental health better. I think there is only so much that particularly neurotypical therapists can do, if anything, in terms of improving autistic people's mental well-being. I think the biggest things that we can see is when we get to connect with other autistic people. So while you two might be working with your autistic young people, I don't know how you describe yourselves. Do you describe yourselves as practitioners or therapists or
not
autistic
therapists?
people? Right, okay. That's fine. That's fine, and it probably helps.
I know, really. We don't really, and this is a funny thing, is that I don't go in and describe myself. I don't go in and say, this is what we're going to be doing, this is who I am. You know, I'm just Jodie. I'm just Jodie.
But actually that probably benefits those young people, because the amount of young people I have spoken to who have been so let down, and sometimes dangerously so.
Yeah.
You know, which I won't go into details, but dangerously so, by professionals in quotation marks, who were therapists who really didn't understand how to support these people. They do not want to speak to another professional. No. They have had enough. So when the families explain who I am and that we might be having a chat if they want to, they don't want to, absolutely fine. You know, they explain. Okay, yes, she's got the word doctor in her name, but she's not a therapist. She's, you know, interested in stigma and autism or whatever, you know, giant African land snails. You know, that's going to go in your favour because they've had enough of being let down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's, you know, that's most definitely common in when I first meet children, is that there's been an awful lot of professionals that have put an awful lot of demand on them in terms of social demands, asking questions, wanting them to engage in their agenda. And I think both me and Mel have work similarly, that we don't go in with any agenda. And even if parents want us to go in with an agenda, I'm like, sorry, it's not how it works.
No.
The agendas, and I suppose, again, this is why we don't necessarily give ourselves any form of role title, is because we have differing relationships with every single young person we work with. So we become whoever that young person needs us to become. And sometimes that's, well, I'd say probably most of the time, that's just somebody that comes around and you sit and discuss your newest fiddle toys and put the world to rights.
I guess my point I think I was trying to make as well is that you aren't going in with that agenda to therapize them.
No,
if you have an agenda at all, it's just to get to know another autistic person. And that's why I keep coming back to the best thing I will always argue, it will be the hill I die on, is that for our well-being to be better, we need to have a positive identity and learn about ourselves via connecting to the community. Because that's what you two are doing, is you're getting to authentically connect with another neurodivergent person. And I think, like, you must see it anyway, that makes some change, even if it's some small change. That's how I see some of the improvement with some of the young people. I have no what's the word? I'm never going to exaggerate what I do for those young people, because I don't think it's any, there's definitely other things that have definitely helped them improve their well-being. But certainly just having someone to come in and go, yeah, I do that. I do that. Yeah. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, it's great. It's that, as opposed to going into those settings, and the amount of fantastic young people I speak to. I say that like that really isn't a lot. I couldn't manage that many families and things. It's just too much for me. But the amount of young people who've gone to a therapist, they know they're autistic, right? That's been recognised officially and all this kind of stuff, like they had a diagnosis, and then they're being told, no, you've got emotionally unstable personality disorder. And it's like, what are you doing? I can connect with that person. That person is definitely autistic. Otherwise, we would not probably be able to have that rapport, right? I definitely am going to get on with non-autistic people, who've, got other neurodivergencies or psychological divergences. But don't do that to somebody and take away their understanding and their knowledge of themselves because you don't understand autistic experience. It's really damaging. That's a completely different train of thought.
Yeah, taking us off.
I think if you're on a level with, because for me, I've got a few young people as well. You probably have as well, Jodie. Is like, some are really still fighting their diet. They don't want to be, and I think some of it is about the sort of the stigma associated, the old Rain Man stuff and God knows what else that's out there. But also, yeah, they're isolated too. So I want to use the word normal, but I don't want to use the word normal. When we're around each other, we're absolutely perfectly. We
had this conversation the other day, didn't we?
But I don't want to use the normal.
Well, when we're together, we're just like all normal. And I was like, yeah. When we're socializing via a WhatsApp group, we're not. I can't remember the word we ended up using. We were authentically ourselves, so we were normal to ourselves.
Yes.
It's probably we did kind of a different word, didn't we? And I can't remember what it was. But
one of my favourite phrases is, we're all weird. Like, human beings are just such weird creatures. When you look at us, look how gangly and weird we are. Like, right? And so, everybody's weird. You just have to find your group of weird, and then you're not weird anymore. That's kind of what I guess you're describing as well. Yeah. And you've both just touched on, particularly Mel, you've touched on this idea that I've written about recently, which is that it is wholly isolating to be a person with autism. Wholly isolating. There's no real good reason to connect in a positive way to another person with autism. But there's a very big difference between being a person with autism and being an autistic person. And that's where that isolation can go. Yeah. You don't have to be alone when you're an autistic person. But there's very little reason to feel good about yourself as a person with autism. It's a wholly negative narrative, and this is what I'm always arguing as well, is that, you know, even if we were a pathology, even if you could find this disordered thing called autism, you know, doesn't change the fact that that knowledge doesn't make my mental well-being any better. It doesn't make my identity or my connection to other human beings any better to think or know that I have a disorder. You know, but thinking of myself as an autistic person, connecting with a culture and where we have our own stimmy languages, and, you know, we can connect with that authenticity. You don't have to be isolated then. It's quite difficult to get people to drop that lens and see how much it could improve your well-being. To not be a person with autism and be an autistic person. Really haven't touched on literally any of the questions that I had. Okay, so hold on. Unless you obviously feel free if you've got any thoughts about what I just said, but I'm just going to stand my questions. Feel free to like.
I was just thinking that actually, you know, when we talk about that again, it boils down to this agency that children and young people don't have, even with regards to who they socialize with and who they spend 6 hours a day with in school. It always has to be people the same age as them. Has to be the 30 children that have been selected to be in their class. And actually the way that most of us as adults connect is via a screen. And you know, we have free access to those screens if it's 2 a.m. and we can't sleep, or if it's, you know, in the middle of the day when we should be doing something else. And again, children don't have that agency to access their tribe in the same way that us as adults do. So I don't know really where I was going with that. I think that was it.
I was going to say that links up to one of the questions actually about screen time, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Screen time.
There we go. That's where I was going.
I'll ask the question, pretend that we actually touched it. Okay, so how do you explain to professionals that putting screen time limits can actually make things worse?
We need Christy Forbes on this. She wrote a really good article about screen time that I shared, and maybe I'll share it. I'll try and find it and share it again on my Facebook page later. Do you want to go first, Mel? I need to process.
I was going to link that into what you were saying anyway, because most of my sessions are done online with young people, but it is about communication. So they're using technology for a lot of different things. One, gaming. I use gaming in the same way as a lot of young people. It's my downtime. Or if I'm, you know, in a bit of a rage, I might put GTA on. Or do you know what I mean? I'll just it's a way of me processing stuff and just shutting down. But it's also probably my biggest communication channel. It's how I talk, not just on here, but, you know, on the phone, WhatsApp, all that. I don't talk on the phone, but WhatsApp.
I was going to say, ooh.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. They use it for so much stuff. There's a lot of learning that goes on. There's so much learning that goes on when they're using technology. Honest to God, some of the worlds that these kids have taken me into, you know, I'm wandering around Minecraft and they've designed these incredible spaces, you know, like architecture stuff. And they're learning all the time when they're designing this stuff. someone else is building their future business in Roblox. It's just, there's loads and loads and loads and loads of stuff that goes along with technology, and by stopping that, it's almost like taking these away, isn't it?
I think it's even worse than that for me. Like if somebody was to take away my phone, for example, then for me, I would not only lose my source of learning through, reading articles that get posted on Twitter and everything else. I'd also be very isolated, very isolated, which is actually slightly, no, it's not saddening to admit, because that's just me being my internalized ableism. I'll be really isolated without my phone, because that is my main form of connection with the people that I want to connect with. And equally, when we connect via a WhatsApp, text message, whatever platform we're using, it makes a big difference for us because of our processing. So like then when you asked that question, I was like, I need some time to think about this. And in some questions I need to have go round and round my head and off on tangents in my head, or like this. Whereas if we're communicating via WhatsApp and I read something, I can think on that for an hour, half an hour, 20 minutes, and then I can, in my head, work out my response, and my response is how I want it to be. I can't do that.
It's almost giving you permission to allow and almost ask yourself or ask the other person without actually having to say it, for processing time.
Yeah.
So many, particularly young people and some of the students who would be 18 plus that we've supported, they've learned to mask that because they've not recognized what it is, right? But they've learned to mask their need to process by asking the person to repeat themselves.
Yeah.
They don't need that person to repeat themselves, because they then answer halfway through the person asking the question again. What they actually need is that understanding of that it's a need, that they can put in a boundary, and that they can put in that self-advocacy, which I would do now. Whereas they, maybe when I was younger, I might have gone, sorry, what was that? Whatever. But now I would go, just give me a minute, or I just need to process that. Like you're doing, you're literally doing that now. You said to me, let me just process that.
When we put that in the perspective of a child in a school setting, if a child isn't answering like that, in the same way that maybe another child in the class might answer a question, they're either assumed not to have understood the question, so then the adult repeats the question and that just confuses you, or they reword the question, so then you've got to process a whole new question, or they just assume that you don't know the answer, and then that's frustrating because they move to somebody else. And
that bit you said about the frustrating thing when somebody, even if you've not asked them to repeat the question, because I won't, I will sit there and I'll think about it or whatever, but the person does it anyway, repeats the question because they've assumed you didn't hear, and it's like, great, you've now just interrupted my processing. I actually put that into my PhD Viva adjustments. I said, please don't ask or repeat the question, and certainly don't rephrase the question unless I ask you to, because you will break my processing and things. I said other things as well, like I will probably close my eyes when I'm trying to process because I'm trying to see the pictures, all this kind of thing. Screen time. And I think, so what you've talked about is connection to other human beings. I think and the thing is as well, it doesn't also have to be that shouldn't be, and I'm not saying that you would think this either, but I'm just meaning that shouldn't be the carrot that we give to the parents to say, you really shouldn't be so hard on them about their screen time because they're probably connecting to other human beings. Well, it's also okay if they're not. It's like, which I know you guys know this stuff, right? Or you folks, sorry. Because my Louis' attention differences, he's always gaming. It drives me up the wall, but mostly it drives me up the wall because he gets so angry and I hear him swearing constantly, and I'm like, I'm in a consult, can we be professional here? Particularly because I'm the floor down at the other end of the house and I can hear you. You know, I have a doorbell for him so that I don't have to keep running up and down the stairs to tell him dinner's ready and that he should come down. So, you know, that kind of thing. As if I make dinner at the moment. No, I don't have the energy. So, you know, I know how important, and he's 44 and he still needs to be he's not on his device, he's in his device, you know, and he needs that. And that's okay. Still drives me up the wall. Absolutely. I feel for parents. I get it. It's very frustrating when he's still up at 3 o'clock in the morning shooting things. And yeah. You know,
I did have a oh sorry, go on, Chloe.
Go ahead.
I did have a young lad that I was working with. He must have been 13-ish. And he played a lot of I'm not a gamer at all. He played a lot of shooting games, and I always used to get it wrong. I can't remember what it was called. I'm not even going to attempt it because I'll get it wrong. But we talked a lot about this game that he played, and he said that when he was playing this game, he knew that everything within this virtual world wasn't real. It didn't take any processing. It was all as it was on the screen. Whereas in the real world, he never really knows whether what people are saying is right or whether their intentions are different, because we don't speak what we mean. There
are rules. There are known, predictable rules to games.
It was all easy. So actually, his mind was able to rest.
Yeah,
his brain was able to rest. And
cat's upset.
Sorry, that's the stray.
I was like, oh, I thought it was your cat, Chloe. But I just thought that was so insightful that, you know, and actually I could really relate to it, even though I don't particularly game, but just scrolling through social media for me, and you know, just being able to share that with his parents was really, really helpful. Actually, you know, that like Mel described, it's true downtime.
And it is, what are they doing on their device? So social media will drain me, but going on Instagram and looking at cute things for an hour or more, you know, that doesn't drain me. It might give me a little bit of spoons back or something. You know, it really depends. I might play. So I'm not a gamer really at all, but I have enjoyed a very select number of games. My friend jokes that every time I suggest a game, it's usually Peggy 7, which is like children's 7-year-olds are, you know, is appropriate for 7-year-olds, which just tells you my tastes. I kind of like puzzle type games. I like beautiful games, and I like the music and all that. And I like knowing that I can't be harmed or die, because that gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? So like Mel, you're saying you do like GTA and stuff. No, my anxiety would go through the roof. But you know, I found Gree, which like I realized how traumatized I must have been from games where they take your health and then you die if you fall off a great height. Because when this lovely character jumped off of this really huge height, I tensed. I was like, oh no, my character's going to die. She didn't. She can't get hurt. It's beautiful. It's about emotions. It's about processing emotions, but there's no words. It was fantastic. And it was one of the most mindful things I've done as an adult. I got so absorbed in this beautiful game, and I found some others. There's Samarost, which is, I've completely gone off tangent. Samarost is just the most beautiful, quirky puzzle game. There's no harm involved. There's you kind of, but the puzzles are not really obvious. That also frustrates me, but they're also not ridiculously hard. I'm very, very hard to please when it comes to games. You know, so, but you can see the like why those certain things might be really important for replenishing a young person's spoons, distracting them from crap. Sometimes we do want to just be distracted.
Yeah.
Yes, at some point it might be nice to approach and try to process trauma. but that is not down to everybody else necessarily. You know, sometimes that, you know, that young person, I do it myself sometimes. There might be things I need to process, and I'm like, but I'm not in that place yet.
No.
I want my distraction until I'm in a place that I can deal with it, kind of thing.
I think you probably touched on something there, Chloe, is that sometimes we just have to wait as adults supporting neurodivergent children in burnout.
Oh, good, back to the topic. So.
Yeah, I've pulled it back.
Thank you.
Is you have to be patient. You can't. Nothing can be forced. I mean, you know, we talked a lot before about needing to be very low demand, and actually, again, and it comes back to what Mel said about trust. We have to trust that young people will when they can, and actually, I'm seeing that more and more in the young people that I work with, you know, where some of them are at the stage now where we're seeing recovery, and it's just incredible. And it's been because they have been left alone. They've been left alone. I mean, not literally left alone.
Yeah.
You know, they've been nurtured, but they haven't had every Tom, Dick and Harry professional coming into their houses anymore. And actually I'm finding this with a few families now is I actually said it to a parent yesterday. I was like, really, what I need to write to go forward for this meeting is, can you all just piss off and leave him alone? Because actually what mum was doing was what this child needed. But everybody else coming in, doing their assessments, doing their interventions was massively hindering recovery.
Yeah.
But equally, yeah, actually, you know, as a parent, that can be quite a frightening prospect that actually my child just needs me right now. And even though my child is struggling, and I want to pull in all of this different help. And, you know, and I've had that conversation with parents before. Is it the right time for them to start working with me right now? Is it the right time for them to meet somebody new? Because that in itself is really exhausting.
Yeah. I think what's really... Sorry, go on.
No, I can't remember. I don't think I had anything.
I'm so sorry if I did cut you off and you've lost it. I think something interesting you said, which is about weight. And I think what is really interesting about that is waiting is actually a lot more active. You have to be very active at waiting. Does that make sense? Like you, as a parent, as somebody supporting somebody, it's very hard to do nothing because we just think we just want to keep doing things. We want to try this, we want to try that. And actually, like what you're saying, and I agree with you, and I think trying to give a little bit of hope to families or whoever it is that might be watching who's worried about burnout for themselves or somebody they care about, it must be really daunting to just be like, but they've been like this for 2 years, they've been like this for 3 years. It's like, yeah, but how long were they in a really traumatizing situation? Was it 5 years? Was it 10 years? It's kind of, you know, I think, was that not you, Jodie? I'm sure that must be you that said, think about the amount of time that they were already struggling.
It was actually Kieran Rose that said it, but then I said I did quote Kieran Rose, but actually I think what I said last time was how reassuring it was to hear Kieran Rose say that, because he said, actually, yeah, think about how many years they were in that toxic environment, that traumatic environment, and then consider that actually it's possible that they'll need that time again to recover, which I felt really reassured by, because, you know, like you, I'm supporting young people that have been in this situation for what feels like a really long time. And even I've worked with a family where I've gone, is this waiting and nurturing, or are we truly doing the right thing? Should we be looking at doing a little bit more, or and actually probably within 6 months of us I had a very open conversation with family, we started to see recovery because we told everybody else to piss off.
Yeah. I mean, I won't use that language. I'm not much of a swearer, but I do agree with the sentiment. Absolutely. I quite like this idea that, go away, you know.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's a really important lesson for people that are worried about those people in burnout, is that learn that very, very difficult active thing of doing nothing.
And actually, you're not doing nothing.
No, I know.
Don't, yeah, I know you know that, but don't view it as that you're doing nothing, because actually you are allowing your child to self-care in the best way that they know how. You know, most of the kids I work with, they know exactly what they need because they're doing it. And again, it comes back to that trust thing.
Back to trusting them. I want to give people a little nugget of hope, because fantastic family, fantastic mum, done all the right things, proper waiting, no expectations, no demands, low arousal, etc., for this young person. And really the consultation with me was just to process it for them, right? To help them, you know. There was no expectation to meet that young person because they just weren't in that place. Absolutely fine. I would like to meet them just because they sound awesome, right? They sound like an amazing autistic person, and I just get really excited about meeting new autistic people. But that's my selfish reasons, right? They might not like me. But we've had a fantastic, and it's not me, you know, the family had a fantastic breakthrough because they actively did nothing, in the sense of, like, say, low demand, low arousal, etc. That young person had their own little breakthrough. Well, it's not even little, it's huge breakthrough and epiphany. And then suddenly, after never really leaving their house, can we go shopping for clothes, please? I need some new clothes. And then, you know, mum being fantastic, because she's fantastic, going, you know, when they're out, should we go back now? Hey, no, actually, I think I'd quite like to go for a coffee. You know, that kind of, and all of that was that young person. They had worked through it. They got through the really difficult period of burnout, and then they got through the processing bit. And you know what? How they did some of that processing? Connecting to autistic people online, talking to other autistic people like them.
And we see this, don't we, Mel? Like we experience these incredible moments with young people all the time. It's a real privilege. You know, where I suddenly get a random message on a Sunday from a parent going, I just need to share this with you. We've been to the cinema. And I'm like, whoa. Like, and again, completely young person led, completely with those regular check-ins and those having those escape routes in place, having, you know, the safety of their phone with them if they need to escape the world. They've got a screen that they can escape into, and yeah, like you said, like when that child or young person is ready, they've done it without any input, or any coercion or anything horrific.
I keep saying things like, I keep wandering around with this sort of semi-astounded look on my face when and like, it's not rocket science. It's really not rocket science. And yet from outside, we'll get things like, you know, we're referring because we want local authorities, tick box. You know, we'd like you to achieve this. No. Like the whole thing about therapy and whatever, and, you know, coming out of some trauma. I've seen a young lad that I work with come through some horrific trauma through school and everything else by not talking about it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it once. Let him, one day we'd sit together and he'd be gaming and we'd be chatting about this, that and the other. And it all, like, just this massive rant of, again, about lots of different stuff, but it was very clear it wasn't about what he was ranting about. It was just coming out. And you just got to do nothing, but actually doing nothing is a lot, I think. Yeah. It takes a lot to just sit with that and not be like, all right, calm down. Do you know what I mean? Because you've got to just sit with that and let him feel safe to just blow, basically. It's all that sort of stuff, isn't it? And then you watch them come through. It doesn't have to be talking therapies and let's talk about the, it doesn't have to be like that.
And I think, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna ask you two, really, actually. Do you feel, and I'm wondering if this is a little bit me, do you think that actually very often we individually, internally process a lot and work out for ourselves? When I think about how I process difficult situations, or not necessarily in a work capacity, I'm talking in a personal capacity, then I might bounce it off a couple of people, but that would be very specific people, and I've probably only had that since really finding my tribe, to be honest. But certainly previous to that, I think I probably spent a lot of time needing space and time and solitude to internally process stuff, and going down rabbit holes, in my head, round the houses, most likely, most definitely properly round the houses. But then come to the conclusion.
Like I say, having to bounce, sometimes we may bounce off other people, but very rarely do I. I do, and I don't know whether that's necessarily like a leftover like trauma response, that I'm just used to doing everything by myself, because actually I feel quite safe and things like that. So it might be because I feel like I've dealt quite well with my younger years and stuff like that. So I'm thinking more of, even like I said, like even if I'm processing and I'm processing out loud, I'll say to my Louis, which is really difficult because of his attention differences, I just want to talk at you. I don't really, and because he wants to do the thing of problem solving, or mostly just going, yeah, well, that person, they're just this and that and the other. And I'm like, that's not helpful. I just want to process by talking at you, which he really struggles with because of his attention differences. But yeah, Mel, is that you? Do you feel you process?
Absolutely. Which is interesting because, again, I'm rubbish at asking for help. Like, if I'm in a really, really bad place, my mates will be like, why didn't you phone me? Why didn't you phone me? I'm always here to talk to. And I'm like, but what am I going to say? Yeah. What do I say? I can't say anything, and it doesn't, I've never been good at talking, and I don't think, I'm not going to talk for everyone, but from the young people that I work with, they all will struggle with this emotion stuff, because some words that just, it's not strong enough. It's not descriptive enough. That's why we use music, put on some loud, angry music, or some really, that starts touching what we feel like.
That's why I never ask, how do you feel? I just ask, what happened to you this week?
Yeah. How did you get on this week? What was your week like? What did you get up?
What you've been up to,
How do you feel is just, how do you feel about that? Oh, God, no.
I mean, how can I expect any autistic person to be able to answer that question when, if somebody asks me how I'm feeling, my go-to is I feel small. And I try to explain this to a fantastic, I say this about all of them, don't I? But they are all fantastic autistic student that I kind of support in some capacity, with extreme alexithymia. There's no negative connotation placed on that. That's just statement of fact. Really, really struggles to connect the emotion with the body sensation with the situation. So all those things exist, but they're not connected for this person. And I was explaining, because they were getting frustrated that some, people were expecting them to have a certain feeling following a situation that had happened for them. and they were getting annoyed with that question and frustrated. And I don't ask those questions anyway. But I said, you know, come up just with the phrase, I'm still processing that emotion, so that they didn't have to keep pretending they knew an answer, or because it actually just frustrated them, they couldn't even come up with it. They just kept saying, I don't know. But people don't respect I don't know.
No.
Yeah. But this is the thing, we're telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or how are you today? Or how are you? No, I'm trying to think, because so many times I've said, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea.
On the spot, and now, So I've given this young person this. I mean, she's not really young. She's 20, 21. You know, this stock phrase of I'm still processing how I feel.
Yeah.
And that's it. You don't need to have anything else. It's nobody else's
That's really
business,
accurate, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's really accurate.
You don't owe anyone sadness, happiness. No. You don't owe anyone anything in those situations. But people really struggle, and Louis still finds it, because he really struggles with perspective taking. So he really struggles when I say, I feel small. And he's like, that's not a feeling. And I explained this to this other person, because she also didn't understand it. And I said, but I genuinely do. So when somebody asks me, how am I feeling? I have a feeling of smallness. You've now made me feel really tiny, because I don't know. Everything is too big. The world is too big. And I literally, and I mean literally, feel small. Right. And then this young person said, oh, I kind of started to get it, kind of thing. But that is how, you know, if you're going to ask me a really difficult question, that's how I feel.
Yeah, a lot of the ones I've had incredible conversations with some of the young people who, you know, they're 11, 12, and one of them creates the most incredible art, you know, straight from, and you can tell. So we'll be in a Zoom, and she's always drawing, you know, because she's going on here and like. But again, she's got to have the processing time. It goes back to what you were saying before about, I always was made to feel a bit thick, you know, because they don't give you time. They ask you a question and you don't, like even now, right? If you read any of my assignments, you'd think I was a different person, because it's finding the words. But anyway, so this kid has the same sort of problems, difficulties, differences. See, I'm getting there. But she'll express herself through art. And we'll have these really deep conversations about the piece of art. And I'm like, that's amazing. Oh, my God, that reminds me of such and such a song. And then she's talking through the colours. And I'm like, this is what I can see in that. And then she'll talk about it. Well, that's getting started. Oh, she's like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Do you know what I mean? She's expressing herself through her art. Other people express themselves through lots of different ways. I don't understand this whole need for it to be a verbal naming of things and categorizing of things. And I see, when you said small, I think small's an emotion. How is it not?
I'm glad somebody recognised what that meant.
Even if you didn't, it's that respect that it's an emotion to you. Like, well, I had this situation recently when one of mine was had an ed psych assessment and was asked how she felt, which is just a ridiculous question anyway. But she used the word overwhelmed, and they said, "But how does that feel?" And she said, "Overwhelmed." And he said, "But overwhelmed isn't a feeling. So like, tell me, how did it feel like in your body?" And she was like, "It felt overwhelmed. Like that's a feeling for me." And I was quite proud of her, because I was like, "Yeah, well done. Like you stood your ground. Like, yeah, overwhelmed is a feeling." It's almost, I think we have a different set of emotions sometimes, or we have a wider range of emotions possibly. And
I think they might be more actually tangible than these abstract ideas. So that person saying, well, how does it feel in your body? Well, actually, overwhelmed is a very bodily sensation, and a brain sensation, like a cognitive sensation, isn't it? When I say I feel small, it's like a physical or tangible thing. It's not this abstract thing called happiness. It's actually more tangible. We have everyone knows we have a strong sense of justice. That's a grand emotion. in the neurodivergent communities. Tanya's, I'm so sorry, we really haven't looked at the comments at all, and I really apologize, because I'm sure there's been some fantastic comments and questions, but there's just not going to happen when there's 3 of us on this screen to have a look at them. But I did just see the one that's like and meh are definitely emotions. Yes, they are.
Yeah,
they are. And sometimes if I don't respond with small and I genuinely just feel meh, that's what you're going to know. That's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going away again from the comment section, sorry. We've got, I thought we would actually at least get through the questions I didn't get through last time, but that didn't happen either. We might have to have us back on again. I think, can we do the one that you got through as a message or an email? I think that might be quite an important one.
Yeah.
Try and wrap up for 9.
Yeah, I need to wrap up for 9 if that's okay.
No, that's fine. Okay, good, because I will just be here forever. So if that's okay, are you all right? Yeah, we'll try and do this one. So we've kind of tried to boil down this message that I think Mel, you were sent, or both of you were sent. So boiled down, it's mum may be autistic, so neurodivergent in some capacity. They want to know if they are to blame, in quotation marks, for 2 of their children who experience high anxiety, as the husband used to have anxiety as a child and the parents forced him to just get on with it. We think we've understood the sort of main question, which is, are they to blame? So are parents to blame when their fantastic neurodivergent people experience things like anxiety? What do we think?
No.
The end.
Yeah, that's a definite no. Yeah.
Wrap up.
I had a little conversation earlier, but we spoke about this too, didn't we? So Jodie, I think, are you able to remember what we were chatting about earlier? Because I think it was important.
I think we chatted about a few elements of this, really, didn't we? I think the bit that I can remember now is something that I said, is actually, as neurodivergent parents, well, just neurodivergent people, parents or not, you know, a lot of us are very hyper empathetic, and we feel through the energies of other people, particularly if those people are our children. So I know for a fact that I very much can feel my child's distress, even though her outward presentation to probably a neurotypical person would be that she's fine. And that's always been the case. So I was outwardly expressing my concerns and my anxieties about my child, who was seemingly just everybody else fine. So it was very much like, well, you're anxious, your child's clearly not, but what you're telling us, you know, what we are seeing as outsiders is mum's anxious, she's causing, the only anxiety we're seeing is in mum, basically, I suppose is the best way to put it. And I know for a fact that this is a common, not necessarily a question that's framed in this way, but it's certainly something that comes up a lot when I'm talking with parents. You know, I am being blamed for my child's anxiety. You know, everyone's saying your child wouldn't be so anxious if you were less anxious. Stop fussing, stop pandering. But actually, we are usually the first to see when our child is starting to struggle. So we respond. And we do pander. We try to meet their needs before anybody else has sometimes even recognised that child needs support. And I find this really frustrating. You know, I hear this time and time and again, and this takes us straight back into the whole parent blaming stuff, which is massive concern and a massive issue for neurodivergent parents or even neurotypical parents of autistic kids, if they exist. So Yeah, that's my take on it. Next.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, my comment that I had was that if those young people feel able and safe to say, I'm scared of that thing, I don't want to do that thing, or I'm scared of pigeons, or, you know, this, that, and the other, then they feel safe to tell you that. And actually that's a good household, because my comment that when we were chatting before was that they feel safe to express that anxiety in the home. I didn't feel safe to express that anxiety, and I ended up being an incredibly masked person who was suicidal. Nobody would have known that from the outside looking in. And it doesn't really, I don't know how empirically valid it is to say that you can basically train or teach somebody to be anxious if they aren't already or likely to experience anxiety, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to explain. How would we then explain, that you've got two children, one who is really confident, really outgoing, etc., 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 and the other one who's not? And you've got the parents. Okay, yes, there's always going to be differences, because even when you're in the same household, there's differences because of age differences, means you get treated differently. Family members will, even if they don't mean to, treat those children differently, etc., etc. But, you know, we have our own individual psychologies and what have you, and it's so much more complicated than we learnt that thing from somebody else, because there's definitely some genetic component, there's the environmental component, there's the learning component, there's the trauma component. You know, it's not enough to say you taught them to be anxious. That would be my kind of argument as well. I would say that mum has allowed or created an environment that meant that their children could express their anxiety.
Yeah.
And I would feel good about that. If I was.
Yeah, because like you said, and I think it's such a valid point, Chloe, is that when a child isn't able to safely communicate that, or when they don't have an understanding of that, as in, you know, they haven't even heard the word anxiety, or they haven't even had, you know, anxiety is a normal emotion that we all have to keep us alive. So it's good to talk about it, you know. So they've obviously they've normalized that, and they've validated that within that household. And actually, I can't remember where I was going with this, but when that anxiety, if that anxiety isn't outwardly expressed safely, it becomes outwardly expressed in a non-safe way, as you've described for yourself.
I mean, that was as a teenager. I think what I briefly mentioned was that I had like prayer rituals. I had all sorts of things. I was an incredibly anxious young person. You would not have known it. I was that autistic child that would sit on the bus and talk to everyone. Did you know I don't live with my parents? And this is why I don't live with my parents. And this is where I live. You know, that child. I've got a very good memory. I've got a very visual memory. I've got a very tactile memory. I know how anxious I was, but nobody else knew.
You
know,
you remember how you felt.
Our family, we didn't talk about things. We didn't talk about feelings and emotions and what have you. So yeah, I feel if we've answered or boiled that question right down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand this not picking up on other people's feelings, because I've always been, that's what I've done. I've always been a people watcher. It's what keeps you safe. It's what, you know, it's for me, it's always been integral. I can tell if someone's on a good hyper, you know, just yeah, come on, let's crack on. Or that's a cover. It's more of an anxious, you know, thing. You sense it, don't you? You feel it. You pick up on it. And I think partly that's what's going on there as well. But also, at the end of the day, parents get blamed enough by the outside, you know, by local authorities, by schools, by, oh, you're not doing enough to get them into school. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. Yeah, no, just
don't do it in the house. Yeah,
don't do it in the
you
house.
need to be a united front against the crap that's going to be out there for your young people anyway.
Yeah, and also if we pick up on emotions, they do too.
Yeah.
So they start picking up on, you know, tension or anxieties, or but they know what they are. But you know, if they start blaming themselves for a tension or a row, then that can cause issues too, I guess.
And I think the one particular important thing to pick up on from Nick here in the comment section is that, when you've got a child who does experience alexithymia, and then part and parcel usually with alexithymia is the difficulty with interoception. I would also find out, Nick, do they think in pictures? Because they probably don't, and that will impact them because there's that connection between alexithymia and not thinking in pictures, and then that impacts our memory. Like, you can see how all this bigger picture. So obviously, because of the diversity of our community, yes, some of us are very good at, maybe, like you say, similar maybe to you, Mel, where I can pick up on that tiny movement and like, oh, autistic anxiety over here, how do we support this person, you know? But then there's obviously, because our community is full of extremes, those of us who really don't know how to pick up on those things. So that person's comment, Nick, is to be able to help that person, they have to learn those small cues and anticipate that person's needs, because that person isn't able to recognize that for themselves, which I think is quite an important thing as well. Okay, fantastic. I knew it wouldn't go for it wouldn't be an hour. We really didn't get anywhere near any of the questions. Can we just finish on that? What is your favorite stim? Otherwise I definitely will just keep you here and you will be a prisoner of me until we've got through all the questions. So what is your favorite stim, which might be just at this moment, it might change?
Yeah, mine changes. I've got 3 different things in front of me today that I'm fiddling with. I'm a terrible nail biter. So a few really. I can't decide. This is my favourite at the moment.
I did see that, yeah. And those are just cheapy little things you can get in.
Yeah, just little, I can't remember what they're called. Some sort of snake.
Did I see you had some sort of squishy cute thing? Was it a squishy?
Oh yeah, I've just got rid of that because it made my hand sway. Oh, I've just moved. I've literally put it out of reach.
Okay, don't worry.
This is my newest thing.
Yes.
I'm always buying stuff like this. I say it's for work. It's not. It's for me. And I like to try and just pick out like one little individual bead and squish it, but I can't. So it's frustrated me a little bit, that one.
This I found fascinating as well, how much we get frustrated by some STEM objects that are obviously not designed by autistic people. Like, you know, the poppy, the flip and pop stuff, it annoys me. It pops better in one direction. Who
than
thought
the other. Yeah.
That was not an autistic person.
It's not balanced.
Mel, I've seen, Mel, you've got it looks like a bike chain.
Yeah, so I've got the tangles.
Love them.
Which are great, and they come apart. You can make them longer. Yeah. So this is the soft rubber one because some of them are hard plastic and I don't like it. But depends. So usually if I'm chatting or I'm thinking or whatever, I'll use this, if I'm writing assignments, whatever. But ever since I was a baby, I had it was something that my mum must have chucked over the cot, but I obviously clicked that it felt really nice to just sort of smooth. So as I grew older, it fell to pieces, obviously. I used to cut little bits off of it to stick in my pocket because I realised, probably not good to wander around looking like Lionel. Is it Lionel? Peanuts?
I think so, yeah. Or Linus. Is it Linus?
Linus, that's it. And then it fell to pieces. And so one day I found this, which I love. It's basically a T-shirt. It was a T-shirt. Oh, I've cut an arm off. It's a T-shirt. See that? Oh, God.
Turn your light on, yeah.
Yeah.
And is it like a silky?
Yeah. So it's just silky, but it's got to feel exactly. So it's not proper. It's not silk like your bed. You know, it's just. It was a perfect match. I was so impressed. So I've had that for years.
You sound very similar to me. It was is it like a satin?
Yeah. So this only usually comes out when I'm exhausted, nervous, burnt out, and it's almost like a comfort blanket, really, I guess. Or
And it does rub together well, but it's also still got like a bit of a friction.
Yeah.
Right. So I had so I sucked my thumb till I was 11. And when the dentist told me that it was going to like damage my teeth and stuff and make them stick out, fine. I sucked my thumb like that instead of like that. I'm not silly. I know how to keep going with my stim. And yeah, so I didn't end up with my teeth sticking out. But it was like, I guess like a sort of crocheted, maybe, I don't know, but like bit in the middle, but it had the two satin bits down the side. Do you know what I mean? Like those kinds of blankets.
Yeah.
But my granny threw away all of it except one satin bit. Please don't do this to your children. I had nightmares and dreams and daydreams that the other part of my blanket was waiting to be rescued. Right? Don't do that to us. But the satin, and I've still got that little strip somewhere, but like you said, it falls apart, so it's in a scarf to keep it safe. But it's the rubby satin. It's fantastic. And the coldness.
Yes.
Do you, when it gets too warm, this is exciting. When it gets too warm, do you move on to like the cold bit?
Yeah, you have to, otherwise it's just horrible. But also in the winter, when it's really cold and you go to bed and it's like, it's lovely. Actually, that's a good idea. I might chuck it in the fridge.
There's a little bit of a video of so my friend Annette's, because she's a performance artist, and one of her shows was about Adventures of Super Autie Girl, and then there was Super Autie Gang when she did it with a number of us, and she has this satin cape for her superhero outfit, and there's me when part of the Autism Arts Festival. I don't know why she was still wearing it, but we weren't on stage. So we must have been watching something else and she'd finished her show or whatever. And we're sitting next to each other and I'm sitting there with the satin, like this sort of her cape. Like, I'm a grown-ass woman.
I laughed the other day because I can't believe I'm admitting this.
I just admitted I sucked my thumb till I was 11.
I stole something. No, I didn't steal it from a shop. But you know, sometimes when you go to places, they put your drinks on like these little like material coaster things. It was just so smooth. So I just put it in my bag and brought it home. It was literally a little white piece of material. It wasn't worth anything.
Yeah, and just those lovely things. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. I imagine we're all getting towards burnout, ironically.
Yeah.
Thank you, lovely people. If you were here the whole 2 hours, you are absolute stars. Just to let everybody know, we do still have a live on Saturday. So this was just a fantastic extra session. And on Saturday, we have Dante. I've learned how to say his name. I've been mispronouncing it and I feel awful. So Dante will be on, where we will be discussing autistic people, humour and comedy, because they are a stand-up comedian, from what I understand. So yes, busting some myths that we don't have a sense of humour. I'm hilarious, so you know, busting those myths. So that's what we've got on Saturday. So thank you everybody so much for being here, and hopefully see you on Saturday. Bye, lovely people. Bye. Nice little bit of outro music to dance to now. Ooh.